Hi, everyone. Welcome. Take a nice seat. We'll give everybody a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. As we're waiting for everyone to join us, just a quick intro on my end. My name is Luca. I'm a customer success specialist here at Productive, and today I'll be your host for our webinar on the topic of macro and micro planning. Yes. Yeah, let's give everybody a few more minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Just a small heads up. So the webinar has a Q&A section where you can post any questions. We'll answer those at the end. I expect that the webinar will take about, 35, 40 minutes-ish in total, including the QA. So yeah, feel free to ask the questions in the Q&A whenever you feel that it's appropriate, whenever they come to mind, and then we'll answer them near the end. And one more thing that I'll repeat near the end, the next topic for our office hours, which should be in about a month, will be setting up your jobs properly and productive. What does this mean? Well, it simply means that we want to help you make sure that the billing types, such as fixed, time and materials, non-billables, recurring budgets, all that stuff, that we have that under control, and that you know how to set these up in the best way for your agency, for the way that you do work with your client. That'll be the topic of our next webinar, but again, I'll repeat that once more near the end. I see that quite a few people have joined, so I think we are good to go. Just give me a minute to get things sorted out on my end. All right. Righty ho. So let's get started. You should see my screen now, I believe. The big purple one with macro versus micro planning. All right, so let's get started. The first thing that we should probably do is define what macro and micro planning are, just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So when we're talking about macro planning, we're generally talking about planning that focuses on long-term project goals and timelines. In other words, we're more dealing with a longer period of time, a longer timeline, on a higher level. In Productive, this we generally accomplish using resourcing and using project booking. So yeah, macro, as it's in the name, it's fairly clear. We're dealing with things on a fairly high level way. When it comes to micro planning, we're focusing more on day-to-day schedules and responsibilities. So in Productive, we generally accomplish this using tasks and the workload view. We'll see how this works in a bit more detail later on. What I will point out just right now is that our webinar today is not that focused on the specific functionalities of the elements that we find in Productive. We generally assume, for the purposes of this webinar, that you're already familiar with at least the basics of either resourcing and or tasks. So yeah, we won't go that much. We won't do that much of a deep dive into how these things work in Productive. We'll be more oriented towards what a business would want to do with these tools at your disposal. So yeah, with the I see somebody raising a hand. Feel free to put any questions that you have in the Q&A, and then we'll resolve that once we're done. Thank you. So yeah, microplanning is done using tasks and workload. The next question that I would like us to take a look at is, why exactly is it that we plan our work? It is fairly clear and fairly obvious, but let's go through it just in case. We would say that generally there are three reasons why you would want to plan your work, three general reasons. First up is to plan your utilization and capacity. So you want to ensure that you want to avoid situations where you have a job in the pipeline that you want to deliver to the client, and then the client signs off on it, and then you realize that there's nobody really in your team that can deliver it, and then you're in trouble. Plus, we also want to avoid the other side of that, which is ensuring that our team members, that our staff members have sufficient work to provide a financial boost to the company. The second part is to forecast our financials. Whether we're doing a deal, whether we're planning a new job, or whether we're working with an existing job, we want to see whether that job will be profitable in and of itself. But also we want to plan the financials of our entire company to see into the future, to see where we need to maybe make any changes down the line. And the third reason is to make sure that everything that we agree with the client is delivered within an expected timeline, right? We don't want to run into a situation where we've agreed with the client that we will deliver everything by the end of June, and then it turns out that actually, we forgot to either schedule or assign some tasks, and it turns out that we won't be able to do it before halfway through July. Not the ideal situation. So those are the three general reasons that we want to plan our work, regardless of the method that we are talking about in production. This is just as a company as a whole, why do we want to plan our work? Now, the next question that you probably want to ask yourselves is, when should you plan our work? And this is a question that I think is fairly important, and I see that quite a few agencies can struggle with asking this question and answering it. The answer to the question is vague, and it's kind of specific to the way that you want to do things in your specific circumstances in your company. But the general answer is as early as possible, right? You want to avoid situations, going back to my previous example, you want to avoid a situation where you have just won a big new job that you have to finalize in the next 6 months. And only then, once it has been signed off, do you realize, hey, we don't actually have the manpower to do this. We don't have the people to do this. We have to either delay this by 2 months, or we have to hire external contractors, expensive external contractors, which will then make our margins significantly lower than we had anticipated, right? So we want to plan it as early as possible, preferably while we are still in the sales process. And there are layers to this. Generally, the way that the ideal workflow that you should be using, which we'll touch upon later in a bit more detail, is that you would first forecast your work using scenarios to make sure that the job meets specific criteria, such as your profit margins and the like. Using tentative bookings, thus communicating that this job is in the pipeline, but it's not yet fully there. We haven't yet signed off on it. And then later on, once the job gets confirmed, you just confirm the bookings and you have the whole job clicking into place. However, you also want to avoid planning the work too early, right? Let's say that you'll say that you're an agency that has, I don't know, 50 new deals landing each, or 100 new deals landing each month. Of those 100, if you have 10 of them actually making it to production, if you spend time booking 95 of them, you've actually spent a lot of time that's not particularly productive, pun intended. So generally, you want to establish a trigger for planning work, like at which point of maturity in a deal do we want to go in and say, okay, at this point in time, we want to either create a scenario and as a later step, book it using tentative booking. So I would suggest that you definitely ask yourself these questions. When do you want to plan your work, and when should you plan your work to meet this nifty balance of making sure everything is in there, but at the same time to avoid too much redundant work. The next question that you generally want to ask yourself is, who does what? Or as I phrase it here, who is involved in the process? We generally see 3 roles in the work planning process. The first one is the resource manager, a centralized person or team that's designated with assigning resources to work on jobs. And we'll go through the general flow with these teams or these individuals later on. What we do see is that agencies generally benefit from having a dedicated resource manager when they reach a certain level of maturity, but also size, right? Because a company that has 500 people is run differently than a company that has 5 people. The second role that we have here is the project manager. And generally, we see project managers assigning jobs via tasks to specific individuals that are assigned to their project. So in the let's say the ideal flow, we don't see project managers doing the project bookings. That's done by the resource manager. And the project manager is then in charge with assigning the individual tasks, the small deliverables that we have. And lastly, the simplest role here is the individual contributor. So this is the member of our team that carries out the assigned work. Now, the one important thing here is that these roles can, and they often do, intertwine and blend. What do we mean by that? There are companies that have sales representatives that are very much taking on the role of a resource manager, right? They negotiate the deal and they choose who will be assigned to delivering the work. This can be in an executive way, where they actually go into productive and assign bookings, or it can be in a, let's say, consultative manner, where they sit down with another person, be it a dedicated resource manager or a project manager, and decide together who is going to be doing the work. Another option is that you skip the whole resource manager role completely, so that you only have the project managers, and that the project manager essentially becomes the resource manager. So when a job is won, or whenever you're doing your planning, the project manager will go and choose who's doing the work and then assign the work to them via bookings. There is a caveat with this, and that is that when agencies reach a certain, as I said, a certain size, and we see it generally being around the 30-ish people mark, you can run into certain issues with not having a dedicated resource manager. This would be specifically when you have project managers who, first of all, who, let's say, fight over resources, right? If John is the best designer that we have at the company, then everybody will want to have John assigned to their project. With a centralized resource manager person or team, you avoided this type of bias, and you actually reach a state where the resource manager will make the decision that's best for us as a company and not for one individual job or project. Another way that you can do that these roles can intertwine or blend is you can actually have a blend between the project manager and the individual contributor, where actually you will book the person, you will tell the person, okay, I need you to work on this project for the next month. But then the individual contributor will be the one that will actually be planning out their work in a more granular way using tasks. So the important thing here is to realize which person in the team is doing is performing which of these roles, and then making sure that you avoid some of the caveats that can be involved with a specific type of process. Now, when we talk about planning work in productive, as I mentioned, there are two ways, macro and micro. With the macro, we're dealing with resourcing. With the micro, we're dealing with tasks. However, one thing that I should point out is that these two are not in direct opposition. So it's not a resourcing versus workload or tasks versus bookings. They can work together. You can actually use both of them, or you can just use the one of them. What I would like us to go over is the benefits of using these options, and that way you can actually make a decision of what suits your needs and your situation the best. So let's go over some universal benefits. So benefits that you will get when you're using either resourcing or tasks. And just remember, you can use either one of those, or you can use both of them. So universal benefits. The first one is capacity planning. So we talked about it before. We want to forecast how utilized our people are. Capacity planning is done more or less the same in both tasks and resourcing. So with resourcing, we're booking people and we see their utilization over a time period. And more or less the same thing is accomplished with workload, where we are assigning tasks to people and we see how utilized they are on a timeline. So we have more or less the same output here. The second universal benefit is ensuring timely delivery, right? So we want to make sure that the work that we promised to the client or signed off on with the client is going to be delivered in time. Again, with resourcing, we can do this. We can check using one simple report like this, whether all of our services have been scheduled and assigned to the proper person. And the same thing goes with tasks. If I've created tasks, if they haven't been assigned to anyone, I can create a simple widget here to make sure that, hey, we have this, we have everything under control, and these unassigned tasks this widget should generally be empty. With that said, in addition to these universal benefits, of course, there are some unique benefits to each of these. So let's go over those. Macro planning, on the one hand, focuses on services, so on the things that you are actually selling to your clients. Microplanning is more focused on tasks. It's focused on internal work that way that we internally more granularly structure our jobs. Macroplanning, on the one hand, is very quick to set up and very easy to maintain. So you have one booking for a person that spans a month. It's 8 hours per day or 6 hours per day. It will be very easy to actually move that a week later or a week before, or to reassign it all to someone else. You don't have 50 tasks assigned to that one person that you then need to fiddle. Microplanning does require more day-to-day maintenance. And this is especially true when you run into situations where you are doing a bottom-up planning that we'll touch upon more in a second, where you actually have the client perhaps changing the conditions or revising the conditions in which you are concluding a contract. And this requires making quite a few changes on your end in how things will be planned out and delivered in the end. Macro planning, on the one hand, also provides a financial forecast of your work. So I have a job, I've sold X hours of X service at a certain rate. I want to see whether this is going to be profitable and how profitable it's going to be. This is especially true if you're using the scenario builder in Productive. The scenario builder, for those who don't know, is a fairly new feature in Productive that's very powerful and lets you plan out your work at a very early stage to make sure that everything slots into place. Microplanning, on the other hand, while it does not provide a financial forecast, it does ensure a higher level of ownership. So I'm telling John that I want this task to be completed by the end of the day tomorrow. And this is something that John is accountable for. And the last one, so macro planning provides us with a high level delivery plan, whereas microplanning is much more granular. So when choosing whether you want to use resourcing, tasks, or both, it's quite handy to keep all of these benefits in mind, or just refer to them back here, and see what makes the most sense for you. Okay. One thing that I touched upon real quickly a minute ago was how do we scope our work? And this is a fairly important question again to consider. The first approach that we see generally being used is top-down. So first we build up our services and their estimates, and then later on at some point we break it down into smaller deliverables or tasks at some point when it's appropriate. Bottom up, on the other hand, works the exact opposite way. So in the initial phase, we start with our deliverables. We see what all do we need to do for the client to deliver the work for them. We aggregate all of these estimates on our tasks, and then we say, okay, this is how much time we have to sell our client, and this is how much we have to charge them. So how does that work in practice? Well, let's take a look at the typical top-down workflow and the way that you would actually do it in production. First, the first phase, the first stage is our initial planning. So we've made contact with the client, we're communicating some sort of expectations that they have, pricing, and so on. In this initial stage, we are creating macro plans using scenarios. So we're just putting it down in Productive, like how much are we going to build a client, who's going to be doing the work, again, using resourcing, using a very rough, high-level approach. And we're building the initial financial forecast. So we're seeing, okay, will this job make sense for us from a financial standpoint when we take into consideration the budget that the client has? That's our first stage. The second stage here is to progress our deal. So at some point in time, once the deal is mature enough, we will want to push it into actual resourcing using tentative bookings. This way we communicate to the entire company, to everybody who's relevant to the whole process, hey, we have something in the pipeline here that might come through. So we're using tentative bookings here. The next stage, in an ideal scenario, is to have sign-off, to win the deal in Productive, and to confirm those tentative bookings that we had created earlier. Lastly, once all of this is in place, once we have sign-off, our last phase is to do the micro-planning part, to break things down into tasks, and to plan our exact delivery. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is that the first two steps, initial planning and progress deal, have this circular kind of arrow situation going on, right? This is because jobs are rarely a straight line, especially as we discussed in our scenario builder webinar last time. So you'll have quite a bit of back and forth, most likely between the client, when do they want the delivery, how much are they willing to pay, and so on. And this is important because if we take a look at our bottom-up workflow, it actually works like this. All of the steps are the same, but it is done in an inverse way. The first part is we do the microplanning. So the client tells us, hey, we want this, 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 and that, and then we'll sit down internally and go over what we need to do in order to deliver this. So we'll break things down into tasks with a detailed project plan. Next up after this, we will do some macro planning. So we will aggregate all of those tasks that we've created, translate them into services, and say, okay, this is the scenario that we have. This is how we're planning to actually deliver the work. This is how it makes sense for us financially. And at this point, the next step is clearly to progress the deal, to make sure with the client that what we're selling makes sense for them, and at a later point to also sign off on the job. So you see that all of the steps are the same, they're just inverted to a certain extent. Make note here that the circular thingy situation with the arrows is not confined only to steps 1 and 2, but also to steps 2 and 3, right? So whenever we have some sort of a change going on in the client's plan, scope, budget, whatever, we'll have to update on multiple positions. This is why a bottom-up workflow is not a bad solution, but it does have certain downsides that you wouldn't have with a top-down workflow. Something to consider in your process to make sure that it's optimized for the way that you want to do things and the way that your team wants to work. All right. So let's leave off this part at least with a few key questions. Key question number 1 that I would suggest you review internally is, do we want to do bottom-up or do we want to do top-down planning? The benefits were outlined on the previous slide, so you can always go back to and refer to those. The second step, once we know that we want to do bottom-up or top-down planning, do we want to use resourcing, tasks, or both? I would definitely suggest that you refer to the unique benefits of both of these so that you can make the decision that is best for you as a company. Next up, make sure that your roles have been nailed. Who is the person that's booking resources and booking your folks in resourcing, and who does it in tasks? Who's in charge, if we go back to this step here, who's in charge of building your scenarios? Is it the salesperson? Is it the PM? Is it a financial person? It has to be someone, right? Who's in charge of making sure that the scenario is actually pushed into resourcing as tentative bookings? Who's in charge of making sure that it's confirmed, that the bookings have been confirmed once the deal has been won? So make sure that you have people in charge of these processes. Also, generally review the option of having a centralized traffic manager or traffic management team, as these are known to have a very beneficial effect on the way that work is handled in general. And lastly, at which point of a job's life cycle do we carry out which planning stage? So at which point do you want to create your scenarios? At which point do you want to push that into tentative bookings? And at which point do you want to confirm those bookings? The last part is generally, and at which point then do you break things down into tasks? Right? Whether you're doing it bottom up or top down, when are we doing which of these? It's generally best you can even do things like triggers using automations in productive to let your team know, hey, at this point, like a deal has reached a certain stage, let's make sure that we have scenarios in place, let's make sure that we have tentative bookings in place, whatever. But this is generally a good idea, at least as a guideline, if not as a strict rule, if that's not feasible, to know when you are doing what. All right. So once all that is done, the question is, how do we do this? And we'll go through this, a very simple example in productive, and then we'll hop over into your questions. However, before we do that, just a few quick notes. A few things to keep in mind. In Productive, the Scenario Builder is a feature that lets you create initial game plans for your jobs. It's available in both deals and budgets, but we do see them the scenarios being used more with deals due to their, let's say, tentative nature. It is a good way, a good option for you to have to initially plan out your work and to make sure that the jobs are profitable before you commit to scheduling them properly. Deal templates are a way for you to avoid having to create deals from scratch every single time and lose a lot of time on them. Especially useful if the jobs that you do are generally similar to one another. So something to review. These were released very recently, so in case you were not aware that they're there, they are. Rate cards are essentially price lists, so they make sure that you can add services to your budgets or your deals quicker and more uniform, so that you don't run into a situation where the price is wrong for whichever reason. And they're also available on a global company level for all of your clients, but also for individual clients if you have special conditions with some of them. And they're also a useful way for you to speed up the whole deal creation process, even if your deals are not templatized enough to be structured into deal template. Next up, project templates are a way for you to ensure that whenever you're creating a new job, you don't have to, or a new project, you don't have to manually create 50, 60, 100 tasks from scratch. Use a project template, have your tasks already set up in some sort of structure, and then simply create the project using a template and to make those small changes as necessary. And lastly, duplicating task lists or folders is an excellent shortcut if you don't have a whole job that's similar to one that you had before to a template. But if you have just a small chunk of it that's similar, you can go to that older job, take that task list, that list of tasks, those 5, 10, 15 tasks, and simply duplicate them to your new job. Again, it's a shortcut that helps you save time, and we all want to do that. All right. Okay, as it says on the slide, productive time. Okay, so let's do something very simple here. What I've done here, I'm currently in this imaginary scenario that I have in my mind here. I'm currently communicating with a client, the client of Galaxy News Network. They've contacted me regarding a new web layout. So they want me to do a new web layout for them. And initially, in the way that I've set up things, in the way that I'm doing it, I'm doing a top-down approach. I've created a few services in my scenario. The scenario is called the June timeline because I want to do this job in June as per the client's request. And based on what the client is asking me, I'm doing a top-down approach, and I think that, okay, we're going to need front-end, and we're going to need design, and we're going to need 80 hours of each approximately. So this is what I'm budgeting for. This is what I'm estimating. My price is generally set globally for all of my clients, so I'm using that here. And also what I've done is I've gone over into my timeline view, and at some point in time, I will have created bookings against the people that I want doing this work. So in my case, Bruce Dixon and Oswald Osborne are assigned to this job. Their cost rates are preloaded, so I can see here, okay, if this scenario goes through, my profit margin will be 30-ish%. Cool. Now let's say that I've had a bit of back and forth with the client. In the end, they've agreed to this plan, to these services, and we got kind of the green light to pursue the deal further. All right. Once I've got that nailed down, I want to apply the scenario here, which will populate my deal with services. And it will also, in addition to that, it will translate those bookings that I've created in the scenario into my resourcing. So I see both Bruce here and Oswald here being booked tentatively on this job in June. Cool. Now, let's say that at some point in time, the client actually gives the final green light for the job, and we win the job. Great success for us. But what we want to do at this point in time, based on my flow, is that I want to take these services, so front end and design, and I want to break them down into tasks. What I've ended up with is 2 task lists, each with 10-ish tasks for my design person, which is Oswald, and for my front-end person, which is Bruce. And I've also assigned initial estimates to these, and I've also assigned a date range when I want these to be delivered. One thing that I've also done here is I've assigned dependencies, because I have a situation, let's say for this case, where the tasks have to be done successively one after the other because they depend on one another. I can view this in either this format in just a simple list, or what I can also do is I can go into my Gantt view here and see what my project plan generally looks like. And those more attentive among you will notice that even though we are starting at the start of June, we are actually projecting to go a bit beyond the end of June. So we're going to be 2 days into July, but I'm hoping that the client will forgive us for that. Once we have all of that in place, in our workload view, what we'll see is that Bruce here and Oswald here have this timeline set up. I will also notice that Bruce here is overbooked on this specific day. This means that I'll probably have to go back into my task plan and make some adjustments. And with that, we have our plan set up and we're ready to start delivering it to the client. I will point out a few useful things here. So let's say that at this point in time, the client, even after we've greenlit everything, the client tells me, hey, we need to delay everything by, let's say, a week. How difficult is this to do? Well, not particularly. You see here we have these 2 bookings that should have been confirmed by me in the meantime. So let's do that right now. And let's say that I just want to move this into the future by a week. How do I do this in an easy way? Well, I simply hold down Shift and I multi-select my bookings. I can do 2, I can do 10 of them if I have that many of them. And I can simply say, shift this right by 1 week. Nice. With tasks, I have something very similar. So let's say that I go into my task list here. There are basically 2 ways that I can go about this. I can either choose all of my tasks here in a list in bulk and simply say, actually, let's go into the project itself. So we'll select these tasks here and simply say, in a similar way, let's shift them by 1 week to the future. Alternatively, what I can also do, if I have my dependencies set up here, where is it? Let's go into the Gantt view. If I have all of my dependencies set up, what I can do is I can simply take the first one and push it forward by a week. As long as I have my setting turned on, which I do not at the moment. So we'll toggle this little thingy on. And at this point in time, we will simply move everything here into the future. And that's the way that we would update our project plan both on a macro level and on a micro level. And that is just about it on my end. And I think we're ready to dive into your questions. Yeah, so we'll go into the questions now. I'll share my screen as needed, but let's take a look at what you guys are interested in. So first, Wouter is asking, can you break down a deal in tasks before it is won? That is a great question, and I should have answered that during the presentation. So as of very recently, Wouter, you can, yes. You can, when you are in your deal, here, what you'll notice is that you can actually, as of recently, you can assign a deal to a project, right? So this new website layout on my end is assigned to the project of GNN new web layout. Here. So what I can do on my end, I can actually break this down, even before it's won as a budget, I can break this down into tasks. You can do this in one single task list. You can do it in a separate folder, for example, which you can name new web sales process. And then you know, okay, these tasks are part of something that hasn't been fully confirmed yet. Walter, let me know if that makes sense for you, please. Georg is asking, where can we get the recording later on? You can find it on our website along with all of the other useful webinars that are there. But I think you'll also receive it by mail since you're the attendee as soon as it's ready. We should have it ready this week, maybe the next. Hope that's okay. Georg is asking, what are my options without ultimate subscription for the macro planning, i.e. I don't have the scenario builder. For the macro planning, if you don't have the scenario builder, you would simply use the confirmed bookings for this. So you would book your deals at a certain stage using confirmed bookings, potentially using booking custom fields to mark bookings as being tentative. However, Georg, what I would definitely suggest is that you get in touch with us and see whether we can move you over to the ultimate plan in some way. I'm sure that there's something that we can negotiate. Okay. Kristen is asking, are the features you reviewed today available on all plans? They are not. I can't think of it at the top of my head, but I know that the scenario builder is only available on Ultimate, and I'm not sure if the tentative bookings are available on all plans as well. Kristen, what I would definitely ask if you're not currently on the Ultimate plan, get in touch, similar to Georg. Let's see if you're interested in these. Let's see how we can make this work for you with fewer or with more features on the Ultimate plan or on something else. Please let me know in the chat if I've successfully answered your question or if I need to take another stab at it. Moving on, somebody's asking, so we don't plan work at all at the moment, but we would like to roll out resourcing. Are there any common mistakes that agencies make when rolling out this process? I would say that this can be answered by the things that we discussed during the presentation already. So make sure that you know who is doing what, make sure that you know when you are doing your work planning, and make sure that you agree internally on whether you're doing it bottom up or top down. I'd also suggest that you avoid one thing that I see agencies doing very frequently, which is using very small bookings. Resourcing, as I hope we've covered today, resourcing is not something that you would use for the communication of day-to-day responsibilities. It's a macro level tool. So you should generally resist the temptation to make like a booking of 2 hours for one day tomorrow. Generally, a litmus test that I would suggest you use is don't make bookings shorter than 1 week. So make a booking that lasts at least a week or preferably even longer than that. We see bookings that last months fairly frequently. The one exception here are your repeating bookings, so you can use those to repeat a certain number of times in the future. These can be shorter, but generally even these can be avoided. You can simply, instead of booking somebody for 8 hours on a Friday, you can simply create a big booking across the whole week for the 8 hours, right? You don't necessarily, with scheduling, you don't necessarily communicate to the people which specific day you want them to be doing something. Instead, you are planning your utilization, planning your finances, and so on. Hope that makes sense. All right, and Georg is saying that his chat is disabled, but that his question is answered. Thanks. Cool. Thanks a lot, Georg. All right, let's give everyone a minute maybe left to go if anybody has any other questions. In the meantime, I'll repeat what I said previously. So the next topic for our office hours that we have planned in about a month-ish time is structuring your jobs in Productive. So how you can structure your jobs in terms of like fixed fees, time and materials, non-billables, retainers, all of that stuff. In a way, we want to make sure that the jobs that you are creating in Productive are complete and full representation of what you have negotiated with the client in real life. Oh, sorry, we have another question that popped up. I think I just didn't see it before. Do scenarios work any differently if we have HubSpot and Productive integrated, where HubSpot deals are showing up in Productive? That's a cool question, yeah. Generally, no. Generally, they don't work any differently. So the way that you would do this if you have a HubSpot integration going on is you would create, I'm assuming you will, because this is what I see with most agencies happening, is that your HubSpot will have, like, I don't know, let's say 300 deals created in a certain period. Your HubSpot integration is set up in such a way that only when a deal has reached a certain stage of maturity, like when you are, I don't know, 30% certain that it will go through, you will push it over into productive, right? Because in HubSpot, up until that point, you're using just basic communication with the client. When you see that there's actual intent to buy, you would push that over into productive using the integration. At that point in time, once it has landed in productive, you would create your scenario to make sure that your pricing, your plan, your delivery plan, and so on are nailed and that they are in accordance with both what the client needs and what you can deliver as a company. Does that make sense? Please let me know in the chat. But yeah, as I was saying, so our next webinar is going to be on the topic of structuring your jobs, both deals and budgets, just to make sure that they represent your work, that you agree with the clients. It'll be in about a month-ish. You should all receive an email informing you of this. And yeah, hoping to see you there. I think we are just about there with time. Thank you. Tyler is saying thank you for all the good info. Thank you for joining, Tyler. And hope to see you next time as well. And I see that we had 2 hands raised by Marlika and Linda. Hoping that we answered any questions that were had previously. Yeah, correct. So one thing that Linda is saying is that currently the connection between the productive deal and the HubSpot deal will change if anything will break if anything that on the deal changes. This is something that we are aware of. This is something that we know, and this is something that we are planning to address in the near future. So yeah, in the future also, when a deal is synced in from HubSpot, well, you should also be able to make changes to it, but also keep the link between productive and on the deal between keep the link on the deal between productive and HubSpot. All right. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for that. All right. Thanks all for joining us. Thanks for coming. I hope this has been useful. As always, feel free to shoot us an email at our customer success mail that you should have. If you don't, I'll let you know what it is right now. So it is customer.success@productive.io. You can always reach out there and we'll put you in touch with your friendly neighborhood customer success manager. Have a nice day, everyone, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.